Harry reached, trying to get to the gun, and he looked at the guy. He was choking Peter to death. Harry didn't know what to do. His hands were shaking, and Peter was slowly dying, and Harry needed to do something. He pointed his gun at him, shooting, but Flint moved out of the way, and the bullet went through Peter's stomach. Peter fell to the ground, screaming in pain, and Harry yelled no, screaming. He begged for help. He looked at Flint, trying to run, but he would shoot him in the back 5 times, and Flint would drop to the ground, dead. Harry ran to see Peter bleeding out, and he was dying. He didn't know what to do, and he screamed, begging for somebody to help. Mary Jane ran as fast as she could, seeing Peter and somebody else dead on the ground. Mary Jane ran to Peter's aid, asking what happened, and Mary Jane told Harry she had to bring him to a hospital, and MJ used her webs on Peter's stomach, holding the blood, and she tied it up, grabbing him, leaving Harry behind. The cops showed up in the parking lot, and they would arrest Harry Osborn, and they brought him in for questioning. He would be in the back of the seat in the car, and he started crying, not knowing what was going to happen to him, or what was going to be said about his dad's reputation in New York City, knowing that his son now killed a man. Mary Jane was still in her costume, and she kept telling Peter there wasn't much further and that she was going to save him. He didn't want to die, and he was begging for help, and Mary Jane dropped Peter off, leaving him, and they took him in immediately for surgery. Mary Jane started swinging through the city of New York, crying, and she went up a building sitting there. It was raining, and lightning could be heard in the distance. All of these questions were going through her head, and the $3,000 was still in her hands, and it had blood everywhere on it. Mary Jane remembered what Peter said about being a hero, and she knew what she was doing wasn't right. Running away from what? Something she didn't do or had no control on. Mary Jane would take the bloody bag of money, throwing it, and it would fall, landing somewhere in the city. She started swinging to the police station as Mary Jane. MJ walked in, putting her head down, and they would see her, and Captain Stacy couldn't even believe his eyes. The girl was still alive, and he told her to come with him. She walked into the interrogation room, seeing Harry Osborn, and Harry looked at her in shock. He didn't know what to say or what to do. Mary Jane told the police everything that happened and how she defended herself from her father, and that all she wanted was a normal life again. Mary Jane also explained how she witnessed the criminal shoot somebody in the parking lot, explaining she was there and that she had to come because she was an eyewitness. The cops charged her with manslaughter, and they would let her go. Mary Jane tried giving the cops more information about what she saw during the Bonesaw fight and the parking lot events. They kept MJ at the station for around 2 days, so now we go to a time jump. Captain Stacy let Mary Jane go and explained that since the house is still in her name, she now owns the house. She was free to leave, and then she thought to herself, this is a big relief on her shoulders, but it's now over. She was still worried about Peter and Harry, and she didn't know what to do or what was going to happen to them, and she thought, was Peter even still alive from the bullet? Just like our original movie, Norman killed and blew up parts of Quest Aerospace with the Goblin suit and the glider. The graduation would still happen, but this time Peter, Harry, and MJ didn't attend it. Mary Jane walked back home to Queens, looking at the house. She started getting flashbacks of screaming and her killing her father. She was interrupted by Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Mary Jane turned her head and she could see them, and she asked how Peter was. Uncle Ben said the kid was going to be fine and that he has to rest for a few days and take it easy. They said that they were happy to see her again and that they were sorry to hear about the abuse and everything that went on in the home. Uncle Ben felt bad, knowing that he should have left the car keys with him, and he felt responsible letting Peter get shot. There was an awkward silence, and then Aunt May said that they were going to be visiting Peter and if she wanted to come with them. Mary Jane agreed, and they would get into the car and they would drive to the hospital. Back at the Osborn residence house, Norman received a letter in the mail explaining that Harry Osborn was free to leave NYPD custody and that there was a court date for the murder of Flint Marko. He slammed the paper on the desk, walking towards Bernard. He couldn't even believe what he was reading, and he didn't know what to do. Bernard told him that he needs to get a son and that the company was going to have to wait, but Norman looked at Bernard, slapping him in the face, saying that he doesn't pay him for his opinions. Norman asked Bernard to take care of this, and then he would say that he was sorry. He yelled at him, telling him to get out, and he would go into a car, driving off to the police station. Norman smiled, knowing that the public party was coming soon, and that he had unfinished business with the board members, and that he was going to finish them off once and for all, getting his company back to the way it was. But there was no time. There was only time for planning. Harry and Bernard walked into the house, looking around, and Bernard said, "Sir, you're gonna want to talk to your father about all this," and Harry put his head down, sitting on the couch. Norman's footsteps would be heard, and they were getting louder and louder. He yelled at Harry, telling him what he was doing, and he didn't even go to his graduation. He embarrassed himself in front of everyone, and now his son was a convicted killer. Harry tried to get one word out of his mouth, but Norman said that was enough, and he was done supporting him. Norman told Bernard he wants Harry out of here within 24 hours before the expo party happens. Bernard said, "Right away, sir," and Harry couldn't even believe his eyes. His life was falling apart in front of him, and he felt backed into a corner, knowing that now he's going to be all alone and he wasn't going to have any financial support for his case. He put his head down, knowing what was he going to do, and he knew this was the only way. Harry walked near his father, giving him one of the worst smiles ever, and he winked at him, slamming the door. Norman was confused, not knowing what his son was up to, but he didn't care. He pulled out a beer and he started drinking. Mary Jane, Uncle Ben, and Aunt May went to the hospital room, seeing Peter. Mary Jane walked up to him, asking how he was doing, and he would smile at her. Peter would take MJ's hand and he said thank you, and Uncle Ben and Aunt May sat down beside him. They would be talking about his condition and everything that happened. Mary Jane told Peter that he was going to be okay and she was going to talk to him soon. She was just happy she was able to save her friend from death, and that she almost could have slipped into darkness if she chose the wrong path. A loud noise would be heard and sonic blasts went off in the distance. MJ looked into the window of the hospital, telling Uncle Ben and Aunt May she had to leave and that something was coming up. They told her she was welcome to come to their place at any time, and she said thank you. She left, running out of the hospital through a back door. MJ put her Spider-Woman costume on, seeing robbers. There was a bank heist and she knew she had to stop this. Spider-Woman swung in, kicking 2 criminals in the face, and she used her webs, throwing a bag of money at the other criminal. Norman Osborn turned his TV on, seeing the fight go down, and he was drinking. He was amazed that there was a creature out there like Spider-Woman. He saw her taking out criminals, and MJ dodged an attack, and out would come the Shocker. Shocker tried shocking Spider-Woman, but she webbed him up, kicking him in the neck. He fell to the ground, and she would use her webs to finish the job off. Norman turned the TV off, smiling, knowing that this was going to be a really good asset if he can convert her to his side. Maybe in time he could do it, but for now, he needed to do one last job. People on the street started clapping for Spider-Woman, and she would take Shocker and the rest of the criminals to the cops, swinging away. It was all over, and the News and the Daily Bugle put papers out saying Spider-Woman, hero or menace. Just like the montage scene in the original timeline, Mary Jane embraced her powers, becoming Spider-Woman and taking criminals out right away. She thought this was better than being an actor. She was right in the mix of things, and people started to love her. Mary Jane, after a long and rough day, went back to Queens at the hospital at night. She crawled up the window, opening it. She could see Peter in the hospital bed, and she would say that it was her, and she didn't want to scare Peter. Mary Jane asked if Peter was alright, and he sat up in pain, telling her that he was going to be okay, and he would be happy seeing that she was here. Mary Jane told Peter it was getting hard and she didn't know what to do or what was going to happen to her. She wanted a life of her own, but now she's also loving her new powers. She asked if Peter wanted to go to the party at the expo in the morning, and she said that she was going to swing to Harry's to see if he wanted to go as well. Peter said that would be great and that he could finally see the sunlight, and he would laugh. He agreed, saying that he was going to be fine and that he would go and that he would be fully recovered. Mary Jane waved at Peter, opening the window, leaving, jumping into the air, swinging away. She had a lot going on, but she thought this was going to be good. She was going to finally see all of her friends again, and now they're finally safe, and that's all what mattered to her. Mary Jane started swinging to the Osborn residence house, but loud noises could be heard, and it was yelling and screaming. Harry Osborn, after getting mad and being threatened that he was going to be getting kicked out, would expose his father for stealing the glider and the suit. The cops followed Harry, and Harry had a black and gray business suit on. 4 cops were behind him, and they would have their guns ready. Harry opened the door, yelling at his father, telling him that he was home, and the cops would point their guns at Norman. They yelled at him, telling him that he was under arrest for stealing equipment from Oscorp. He yelled at the cops, seeing Harry there. He had many questions, wanting to know why and how he found out about the suit and the glider. They told Norman to kneel and put his hands over his head, but he wouldn't. Norman jumped out of the way and they started shooting. Harry couldn't even believe this, and he told the cops to stop shooting. Mary Jane heard gunshots, and she would go into her costume, running into action. Norman ran quickly, running into the secret room, getting his suit on fast. His plan was over, and now he needed to come up with another plan. His son betrayed him and now he wanted revenge. Harry ran, telling the cops he was in this room, and he would point and there would be a broken glass room and Norman Osborn would put a suit on. He told them that they were going to be the only ones that were going to know about this and that they were going to die. And he clicked a button and threw a pumpkin bomb. Harry ran, ducking for cover, and the room would light up, blowing everything up. The cops turned into skeletons and the Osborn residence house was on fire. Harry screamed for help, but Norman went onto his glider, hovering over. He picked him up by his throat and started choking him to death. Spider-Woman couldn't believe her eyes, but she would use her webs, and Green Goblin turned around, getting webs in his face. Spider-Woman swung in, kicking Norman off of his glider, and Green Goblin fell to the ground, smashing his body off of pumpkin bomb walls. And Spider-Woman took him by the neck and started punching him over and over again until he fell to the ground. He begged for help, telling her to stop what she was doing, but Mary Jane didn't listen. He was trying to hurt Harry, but she looked around in the room, getting caught off guard. This was Harry's place, and the room was filled with military equipment, and she just stopped fighting, circling the room. It was massive. Green Goblin reached for a pumpkin bomb, and Mary Jane's spider sense went off, but it was too late. It blew up, and everybody would go flying across the room. Green Goblin got on his glider, quickly zooming out of the building, and he could hear cops and sirens. He could see his son not moving on the ground, and he started laughing, telling Spider-Woman that they would meet again. Harry was on the ground, injured from the pumpkin bomb blast, and Mary Jane said what happened, and she started freaking out, taking her mask off. She tried helping Harry get back up, but it was too late. He looked to see his arm, and it was almost blown off from the blast, and he said that he wasn't going to make it out alive. There was only a matter of time before he was going to die, so he told MJ that his father did all of this, and that she needs to stop him before he harms anyone else and the city. She cried, and Harry started choking, and he died. Mary Jane dragged his body, leaning him up, and she took her mask back on, and she crawled out of the burning building, and she could see Bernard and the board members walking into the house. Bernard started crying and freaking out, and he could see Harry's body lying on the ground dead. He demanded to find Norman Osborn, and he told the members to put him down for good. MJ saw smoke in the air, seeing that Norman was already gone. She failed Harry and wanted to get her revenge on Norman for everything he did. Back at the hospital, there was a breaking news story that said Harry Osborn was killed in an explosion and that Norman Osborn was missing. They revealed that the expo and the party was cancelled and that Oscorp and Quest Aerospace was now merging into Alchemax. Peter cried, hearing the news, wanting to know what was going on. Harry dead? It was the suit and the glider, and he had the power to tell Mary Jane about it, but he didn't. He thought it was all his fault and that Harry died because of this. He should have told her before, but now it's too late. An echo in the room would be heard saying that he's dead, and Mary Jane would appear out of the curtains in her ripped up costume.